Our first professor tonight, and also I want to thank Adam Taylor before we talk about our work for being a great preparator and a great gallery coordinator for this exhibition. And his work is also in the exhibition. The cool video you saw at the end of my video walkthrough. It's pretty trippy. It's an installation that's really neat. So I hope you guys come and see that installation and all the other work in the show. So our first guest speaker tonight is Ben Funke, who teaches drawing and sculpture and other stuff too, like art appreciation, different things at College of the Redwoods. So Ben will go ahead and share his screen and talk about his recent work. Take it away, Ben.
Thanks, Cindy. First of all, I would like to say thanks to James, Adam Taylor, and Cindy, Shannon, for really putting this together. I know how much work goes into something like this. And it's just, it's really nice to have colleagues that care so deeply about, taking us through a faculty show in these kind of tougher times. So I really appreciate that, and thank you so much. Thanks for everybody else for participating in the show and for everyone that has turned up tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully this works all right. Let me go to full screen. You guys all see that okay? Good? Okay,
yes,
cool.
Now it looks great, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was just going to do a quick tour over some of my more kind of recent works, but it kind of even extrapolates back further into my youth, I should say, and talking about my work and where it has come from and where it's kind of heading. So the image that you're seeing on the screen is a drawing that I submitted, or I had in a show at CR right before the pandemic shut everything down. The show opened, I think, in February of 2020. And I was really excited about that show. And then all of a sudden it was like the opening happened and then we all got sent home. So these drawings didn't really get to breathe very long. But this was an image that I've been living with for probably close to 20 years. This was a photograph that I took in Chicago when I was in my undergraduate there. And little did I know at the time that it was going to kind of start this kind of career-long pursuit of my relationship to athletics and to sports. And so if you can't really depict this image, it's kind of broken apart and abstracted quite a bit. But this is an image of a basketball hoop in downtown Chicago. There's high-rise apartments all around it. And you can barely see here that there's a basketball like stuck in between the backboard and the hoop. And I just photographed this image on my way to school, and I didn't realize at the time like how important it would have become in my development. Because since then, I've always been trying to negotiate artistically my relationship to sports, in particular professional sports. So this photograph had been sitting in my digital hard drive, my archive, for a long time. And while I really loved the image, I didn't feel like it really went to the level I wanted it to for, my artistic purposes. Like it was a photograph and that was cool, but it didn't really do it for me as an artwork. So then I started working with these, highly contrasted images where we have, full black value and full white value. And when I started working with these, it got really abstract and I had to kind of fill in the blanks with my imagination of what these images became. And so this drawing is approximately 4 feet wide and about 6.5 feet tall. And it's all done with India ink on really heavyweight paper. And when I completed this drawing, I was immediately in love with it. And I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of where I want to go with, the 2D work that I was making in this kind of dialogue with professional sports or sports in general. So again, this is just an image of, a concrete jungle, like downtown Chicago, urban, big brick buildings and gray everywhere, the wrought iron fence. So it wasn't a very particularly attractive location. It just spoke to me. Whoops. Okay. So here is an image from the installation of that show called Fly the W. This was at CR over a year and a half ago. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see the image that we were just looking at on the wall. But in the foreground here, I have kind of the start of the sculptural works that were in this also kind of similar dialogue. The sculpture that's on the pedestal right in front of you, or right in front of us, and then the one directly behind it, those are cast bronze sculptures. They weigh approximately 60 pounds a piece, and those are basketball nets. And so these nets were, purchased at a store, ones that you would just go put on a hoop outside, and then I would dip them into melted wax, and I could form that net into a into a form or a figure, or however I would like to sculpt it, and it would hold its position because it was rigid, and the wax would give it some heft, some weight. So I'd keep dipping these sculptures in the wax to build that wall thickness up, and eventually I would cast these in bronze through the lost wax process. These were a really transformative work for me. The downside to this work is that it took years to complete. I spent 3 years of trial and error to get them to be able to cast fully. And once I did, it was like one of the greatest achievements of my life, to be able to technically figure out how to do it. And the reason why it was challenging is because the net itself, there's a lot of rhizomes in it. They're going every direction. In order to get the bronze to flow properly, it had to have a specific set of gates in order to get the bronze to the right places. So while these are really amazing works for me to achieve, I really felt like I needed to get something that was a little bit more expedient, something that was faster for me to work with. And that's where I came to these sculptures. Formally, they're very similar. They are also nets, but these are done in ceramic. These were dipped in a ceramic slurry and then hardened and then fired in a kiln. Once they were hardened, instead of putting a glaze on it like I guess a traditional ceramicist, I took more of a penchant to like hot rod colors and auto body paint. So these are multiple coats of different colors. So you can see that there's like orange underneath the blues. And I would use things like sandpaper and acetone to reveal those layers in order to expose the colors beneath it. Once that was done, I got this really incredible clear coat, which they use for engines and hot rods. It's a high heat, super thick glass clear coat. And so when you coat it in that clear coat, it gives it that candy coat finish where it's like almost still dripping wet. It's so glossy. And I really loved how this came about. I with the process being so fast, like I could make these, I could form the sculpture in, probably in a day, and then it would take a couple more days to paint and to finish. But that process was a lot faster for me. So I didn't have to rely on these, year-long pursuit of casting bronze. I could do these things really quick and have a lot more experimentation with it. And, even with the color and the finish and everything, I could do it really fast. So these became really seductive objects for me to make, just because they were so much fun. It allowed me to do things with color that I never thought I could, pull off as the colors that I'm using, I don't really gravitate towards normally. And that was something that you'll see in my drawings as well, that kind of helped me break out of, I don't know, more, a palette of black and white and bronze and, I guess a little bit more conservative palette. Now I'm getting a little bit more wild, and I really enjoy that part of it. Those are the three ceramic pieces that were in the show at the faculty show. Really a lot of fun to make. I really still love looking at these things. They really pop. This is one of the drawings that I included in this show. And again, in contrast to the black and white drawings, these are completely different. The subject matter is similar, but also different. It's again, a relationship to professional sports. And what I was trying to achieve with these is trying to depict professional sports without making it look like I'm a fan. That I'm, when you're making work about sports, or at least professional sports, it comes off often that you are a fan of it and you're doing it out of cherishing the, great players in the game, or it isn't a critique. It's more of a, how do I want to say it? It's like you really do love these players. And I wanted to have something that's a little bit darker and a little bit more, and you have another interpretation of what I'm trying to get at. And so what I've done here is these are all still images of video from sporting events, professional sporting events. And this one in particular, we have Mark Jackson is dribbling the ball, and the Menendez brothers are in the background of that. And this was a video that I paused on a TV. And what happens is you've got layers that separate. So you have like two frames side by side that kind of overlap. So things are blurry. Some things don't fill out. Then I project these images and rephotograph them, but I project them through broken equipment. So the colors that are coming through on the projector aren't lining up, and it's causing these colors to separate and kind of wild things to happen. And so what's happening is I'm trying to get that dialogue of, as a fan watching professional sports through mediated devices, through television, through things like that. Or if there's a really important moment in sports and you're captivated by it, it happens so fast that you only remember a certain specific element of it, or you only catch that 1 second. And so I was really trying to capture that type of elation or excitement in one image, in one still frame. So this is one particular image, and then the other large image that's in the show. Adam, thanks for wrestling with that to get that on the wall. Those were two recently completed ones in the studio, and so I'm still kind of living with them, and it's really exciting to see them out and breathing. I only have a couple more images before I send it off to other folks. So recently, I guess it would have been during the pandemic, I started a nonprofit called Rebound, and it was all about public art, creating art in public spaces. And this was a project that we did for Outer Ruminations. Lindsay Kessner, fellow faculty, colleague here. Hi, Lindsay. She helped on this project. And what we did here is large cyanotype prints. And you can see the layer on top is the diagram of a basketball court. So we had 2 sheets of plastic of plexiglass, and I taped the lines of the court. So we had like a stencil. And then we laid down all of these elements of flora on top of the cyanotype paper. This is a gigantic mural sheet. It's like, you can see them behind me, actually, they're huge. It's like 6 foot by 8 foot or something like that. They're massive. And what happens is that the sun exposes the photosensitive material on there, and you get these large, kind of amazing dark blue photograms. And so here, Ryan Hash and myself are holding up one, and this was all created with abalone shells and sand. There's saran wrap. So we get these really kind of ghostly images, and we still have the stencil or the lines of the court. And so these really, I think they really turned out really beautifully. The two of my own horn, I really love the way they turned out. It is just, again, a continuation of sports interweaving with my art practice. But this was just the first step, and this is kind of where we're going in the future. Is a way to, really create something that I guess addresses the sports and art relationship pretty clearly. We painted this mural on the basketball court in Shea Park in Arcata this past September. So this was a collaborative effort between my nonprofit Rebound and the city of Arcata. And this was a design that we did in-house. And then over the course of 2 days, we completed it on the court surface. And this is just kind of the start. We have 4 other courts that we're going to be starting in 2022. And 4 of those are going to be in Arcata, and then potentially one in Eureka as well. So it's really kind of an exciting time, and really just a fun way to kind of put a little bit more color in the community. And what's really interesting when I look at this image of this court, and I flash back to that court that I photographed in Chicago in the early 2000s, how it was kind of stuck into this, concrete playground. It was all concrete, gray and brick, and it was just monotone and gray. And I look at this and I think this is kind of where that whole arc is leading from that court in Chicago to this bright, colorful playground in our community. So anyway, thank you everybody for allowing me to speak about my work and try to keep it concise, and thank you.
Well, that's awesome, Ben. It's just, your work is great, and I love the sports direction. And folks, I also want to tell you that we're going to have some time for Q&A after our presentation. So if you'd like to ask questions of Ben, you can certainly hang around and you can ask him questions about his work. I'm thinking about like Jonas Wood or Paul Pfeiffer, other contemporary artists who incorporate fascination for sports and sports fandom in their work. And yeah, you're part of that realm, which is really exciting and cool. So
thanks,
yeah,
thanks, Cindy.
Thank you. So next up we have Shannon Sullivan. So you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yep, here I go. Let's see here. Very good. Well, once again, thank you everyone for attending. And thank you so much to Adam and to Cindy for all the behind the scenes work that y'all did to put this exhibition together. It's so much work. So thank you so much. I'm celebrating my 15-year anniversary teaching at College of the Redwoods this year. So that's really, really exciting. This has been a good run. Over the years, I've taught mostly a variety of 3D studio courses, including ceramics and sculpture and introduction to art. I teach professional practices in entrepreneurship in the visual arts, and right now I'm developing my art appreciation class, and I've been teaching that for a couple semesters. And I love living here, and I absolutely adore CR students and working here. So this is really a treat, and I'm just grateful for these 15 years. One of the things that drives my creative practice is travel and adventure and seeking out relationships with people in other places who share a passion for ceramics. I love soaking up all that a place has to offer and then bringing everything back to the classroom, back to my studio. I love sharing items from my travels with my students. The shards on the upper right came from the shard market in Jingdezhen. This image on the bottom is from the train station in Bizen, Japan. They really do serve your tea in ceramic cups there. And I've been to Scandinavia a few times for some ceramic related travel and residencies. And really this is what fills my cup. And I guess I'd like to show you what I've got going on in the studio right now. To give you a little history about my work to better understand, I guess, how surprising it is that I'm showing watercolor paintings in this exhibition. So right now in the studio, I'm working on this series of larger discs. This is a series I've had going for the last probably 5 or 6 years. And these are for an exhibition coming up in Sacramento this spring, and the exhibition is called This is the Anthropocene. And these works are focusing specifically on that moment or those indicators of human impact on the stratigraphic record. So that's what these works kind of explore, using the language of abstraction. I've been really, really grateful to be back in the studio working with clay. During the pandemic, managing to figure out how to reteach ceramics online, I feel like kind of zapped a lot of my bandwidth for this material in a creative practice, which does explain why, in some ways, why I'm showing watercolor paintings. I'm so happy to be back at it. So here's a few examples of pieces from that series, just to give you an idea of what they look like when they're finished. This one is disc with delineating drifters, and I research oceanic phenomenon and reinterpret these tiniest of creatures in my work, and I'm interested in the way that they move. And I also look at the landscape, and I observe human intervention with geologic phenomenon. This piece, Disc with Linear Fissures, uses aerial imagery to reinterpret the earthquake fissures that transpired during the 2018 eruption event on the Big Island of Hawaii. This piece, Disc with Scallop Wedges, is kind of about that as well, thinking about how phenomenon kind of cluster and gather and repeat phenomenon across different species and different scales. Oh, my clicker's not working now. There we go. I also have recently made some interactive works, and when I say recently, since my almost five-year-old child was born. This is one of the projects that came out right after she was born, and I want to show you a little video of these. This piece uses neodymium magnets, ceramic, wood, steel, and linen to create an opportunity for the viewers to have some kind of curatorial agency when viewing this work. It's more about participating, less about viewing per se. And the idea that this piece can take on lots of different forms of temporary finish in the gallery with each participant. So this one was shown in Portland. See if this works. Maybe I can make this big. This is just a quick video showing you how the piece works. This is my friend Shani, who was also in this exhibition of interactive artworks. So the forms for this work are based on the internal structure of a soap bubble cluster and trying to expand upon this idea of how forms accommodate for one another, and thinking about how people, animals, different communities respond to who's right next to them. So, and I was so interested in making this work to see how people arranged it, to observe how different people thought about creating relationships with these forms. Another project I've been working on since the pandemic is this folded paper project. And it was a group of artists together working with a gallery in New York. The project was proposed during the beginning of the pandemic to start working with these hand-drawn nets for folding paper. And beyond that, the parameters were really broad as far as what was going to happen with these pieces of folded paper. So I started exploring covering my folded forms in paper clay and building up layers and then firing out the layers. This is a project that I've been working on slowly. And like Ben was saying, with all of this technical failure, this was a huge one for that. I feel like to get to a point where this was working a little bit, there was so much failure involved. So these do feel very victorious in that same way. So I go into this very well-timed fall sabbatical during the first semester of fully teaching during COVID, with an artist residency scheduled at Dorland Artist Colony, which is an interdisciplinary residency in Temecula, California. It was perfectly awesome for COVID reasons. Their little cottages were totally safe, and it was just incredible to be able to go somewhere and dive into my creative work. So I landed in Southern California with my friends in San Diego, John and Jess. She's a painter and John works in clay, and they both use watercolors. And we had just talked about how we were going to get together and paint. And I had started painting with my watercolors before going down there. And that's kind of how these paintings were born. During my residency, I triangulated painting the folded paper projects and building my art appreciation class online. It was quite the triangulation. But the first thing I started painting were some sculptures that I had made. I really, didn't plan to show these, didn't plan to really, I had no expectation for what this work was going to do for me down the road. So I just started very innocent painting these sculptures. Here's a studio shot. And you can see this little bloom study, this little blue guy down here is the one that I painted first. And that's how I got started. And I feel like I had to paint my way through various different scenarios that I had been working with in clay, such as the bubble arrays. I painted some watercolor pictures that were about that, reinvestigating those forms until I could kind of lose myself and feel a little more free, not with the newfound medium, with the new language that was developing. So, and I just thought I would say, for those of you who are unfamiliar with or who are familiar, I should say, with the history of the College of the Redwoods Art Department, there have been at least two that I know of very skilled watercolor painters who are watercolorists proper. And that's not me. I'm coming at this from a totally untrained perspective with watercolor. And that's okay. Like, I'm just using them in a way that sort of works for my purposes. I just thought I would mention that. Bob Benson and Emily Silver. And I don't know if I'd be showing these paintings if Emily Silver was still on our faculty. That's for sure. She's incredible. But yeah, one of the reasons that I wanted to show these instead of some ceramic work was, to demonstrate that vulnerability that even artists who are well into their careers still experience when trying new things. And just to show you that experimentation is a big part of the process. So here's a picture of Dorland set in the mountains in Temecula Valley. This is a little cottage I was staying at. It was the perfect creative retreat for me at that time. Our daughter was 3 years old when in March of 2020, and I spent most of the first 8 months of the pandemic caring for her without much help outside of our house. So an opportunity for me to really sink into these 16-hour creative days was so welcome. These paintings ended up being little self-soothers that have stuck with me this whole time. They're so immediate. They don't demand as much of me as working in clay with the whole process with the material. These are a little lighter, a little airier, were a little easier for me to pull off, to maintain a creative practice. These watercolors are sort of it for me. So I started revisiting imagery that I used a lot in my work, onion cells, and hybridizing them with some of the succulent plants that were growing off the porch, a nice string of bananas. So I made these strands of allium. While I was painting, I was thinking a lot about music. I had a lot of time to listen to music. This might sound a little crazy, but I totally rediscovered Billie Eilish and was watching all these great rock and roll concerts on YouTube during my painting sessions and during COVID in general. So I feel like some of these are inspired by all those wild light shows. It's another one of the pieces it's in the faculty show, their take on these beams. And the idea of a brick as a unit, as a building block, thinking about things kind of compartmentalized in that way, unit by unit. I made a whole bunch of paintings within this watercolor series that were about brick paths. So these are kind of a take on that. It was really hard for me to come up with an edit for this exhibition because I have been making so many of these paintings, and to find relationships between the paintings that really worked in the gallery was hard. This is not my usual modality for making and showing work. So I just feel like I learned a lot throughout this whole process. When it comes to display and lighting and everything, these have certain ones of these have a micaceous quality, that there's some shimmery pigment, and figuring out how to photograph and light those has been really informative. And I feel like every good story about Southern California artists lands you back in the desert. There are a few of these paintings that were made on the back end of the residency trip in Joshua Tree. I met up with those same friends, and we had a couple more days to paint in the desert. You can see this wonderful outdoor studio. I just love the convenience of paper and watercolors that aren't wet, and a brush and a cup of water. I am so attracted to that right now, the simplicity of it, the ability to just kind of make something fast has been of incredible value to me during this time. So thank you for looking at these little paintings and following along here, for being here. And if anyone has any questions about the paintings or any of this work, we'll talk about it more at the end. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Shannon. Your work has always inspired me. I love the biological forms, the scientific element. I've painted watercolors in the desert, and I know how hard that is, how quickly the watercolor dries. Oh my gosh. But yeah, they're beautiful works, and thanks so much for including them in this exhibit. So,
Thanks.
okay, so I guess I'm next. I get to share my screen. Hold on. Okay, some of you folks may know me. I have been making videos and essays, writing essays for the last 10 years or so. I'm really interested in industrial, agricultural, and infrastructural landscapes and the interactions between humanity and nature in these places like rivers and industrial scapes and dams and agricultural sites and wastegapes and powerscapes. That really fascinates me. Infrastructural landscapes, and how to pair videos with the research that I do for every video, because I do a lot of research and I'm a writer as well. So getting the essays to work with the videos in physical formats like in galleries, or in online formats where I can imbricate my creative production. I can put the essays together with the videos. This is a scene from the Humboldt Bay project that I did several years ago about Humboldt Bay. And I've done several different, oops, I went ahead too quickly. I've done several iterations of video and essay combinations in both physical gallery settings and in online formats. And this was staged, this particular exhibition, Cultivated Ecologies, was staged several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, at Humboldt State University, and also it was later published in Places Journal, which is a really great interdisciplinary journal for examining the built environment in a kind of academic way, but in a way that also is calibrated for the sort of educated non-specialists. That's sort of my audience. I'm really interested in targeting policy people and people that can make a difference in environmental restoration, because I'm really, really into ecology and the environment, and in political activism too. My work always has an activist component. I'm also really interested in the Central Valley. I've been interested in it for at least 10 years. It's the backbone of our state. It's where the agriculture is. It's where the water infrastructure is. It's where much of the power infrastructure is. It really powers our state, even though us living on the coast don't really think about the Central Valley too much, except when we drive through it. It's usually as quickly as possible. But I'm fascinated by the Central Valley for what it used to be. It used to be this vast marshland and vast plains and grasslands and riparian habitat. And what it is now, it's been completely replumbed, and it produces 25% of the nation's food. It's a really, really agriculturally intense place. It's a powerhouse of agriculture, and I'm fascinated by that. Now, in this map on the right-hand side, all that green, that's all agriculture, ag land now. So it's a pretty remarkable place. And the reason why it's ag land is because of great water projects, great infrastructure like the Federal Central Valley Project that started in 1933 to bring water essentially from the mountains, from the Cascade Range and also from the Sierra Nevada to the Central Valley for cities and farms all over the state. And the two keystone dams for the Central Valley Project are Shasta Dam on the Sacramento River and Friant Dam on the San Joaquin River. And maybe you've seen Shasta Dam. It's this enormous edifice. I mean, I love dams. I hate them. I am enamored by them. Their sheer power and force and engineering qualities are just astonishing to me. And yet they serve infrastructure like the State Water Project serves our state so well. It's really been the economic driver for much of what we love about our state, and yet it has a lot of environmental problems, as you very likely know. For the State Water Project, which is a state-run water facility or water system, Oroville Dam, near the town of Oroville in Northern California in the Sacramento Valley, is the keystone for the State Water Project. And you can see in this map that water goes all the way from Northern California, from the Sierra Nevada and the Feather River, all the way down to Los Angeles. So these water infrastructure systems span the entire state. And like I said, they've done a lot of good for our culture, but they've also done a lot of environmental damage, specifically to salmon. And that's the project I'm working on now, Anadromous Architectures. And one of the movies that's in the exhibit is from this ongoing series that I'm hopefully going to finish pretty soon. I'm closing in. It's been the most complicated project I've ever undertaken. Oh my God, there's so many moving parts to this story. But these dams, like Goodwin Dam on the Stanislaus River, Englebright Dam on the Yuba River, virtually every dam in the Sierra Nevada, or forgive me, every river in the Sierra Nevada has been dammed for agriculture, for urban water use, in some cases to hold back hydraulic mining waste, like the Englebright Dam on the Yuba River. These dams, as you can see, are high, very high. There's no way a salmon is going to get over these dams. There's absolutely not. So it's cut off the spawning habitat for the salmon in the Central Valley. The Central Valley is a really important spawning habitat for Chinook salmon in particular, other types of salmonids as well. But the Chinook or king salmon is a keystone species. It's a very important species for the state of California. It's a very iconic species that in some cases are threatened and endangered. And 95% of Chinook salmon habitat has been cut off on account of these dams. And this map demonstrates that. The blue is the original spawning habitat for the salmon. The black is where the salmon can no longer go on the right-hand side. So over the course of 100 years, dams were built to essentially destroy the salmon habitat, 95% of the spawning habitat. So returning adult populations of salmon in the Central Valley plummeted from 1 to 3 million fish annually, returning adults, to less than 100,000. And that continues to decline as the climate warms, as there's more demand on water from agriculture in the state, from cities, growing cities in the state as well. Chinook salmon, all salmonids, are cold water species. They must have access to cool water, preferably 56 degrees Fahrenheit or less, in order to spawn and survive. If it's over 70 degrees, adult salmon will die. If it's over 56 degrees, eggs will die, salmon eggs will die. So it's critically important that salmon have cool water habitat, and this cool water habitat is traditionally in the higher elevations, of course. Higher up on the mountains, that's where you get the cooler habitat. The spring run Chinook and traditionally is a type of salmon that traditionally inhabited the higher elevation. You see all the pink in this map, all the pink areas here? This is where the spring run once existed and now no longer exists. They've been been completely extirpated from almost every river in the Sierra Nevada, save 3. There are 3 rivers where there are still wild salmon, spring-run Chinook salmon, that still spawn free of hatcheries. And one of those places is Butte Creek. And so the movie that I made for the exhibit in this, the CR exhibit, is about Butte Creek. Half of that film is about Butte Creek. It's like a perceptual, non-narrative, experimental documentary about the geographical habitat of Butte Creek. So I want to talk a little bit more about Butte Creek to give you guys some background for understanding the movie I made. Here's Butte Creek Canyon from space. Here's the town of Paradise. This is a town that was devastated by fire several years ago. And on the left-hand side, there's Chico, there's suburban Chico. So it's in the Sierra Nevadas and the foothills in the northern Sacramento Valley. Here's Butte Creek Canyon from the ground, and you can see it's this beautiful canyon that was carved by the creek over the course of millennia into volcanic rock. It's just a gorgeous place. And this rare and highly threatened Chinook salmon still exist in this one fairly low elevation creek in the Sierra Nevada. And this is where they have to travel. Maybe you're familiar with salmon, how their life cycle, their life histories, but they're born in their ancestral creeks. They migrate out to sea, spend several years, typically 1 to 3 years in the open ocean. They grow, they fatten up, and then they return to their ancestral spawning streams to repeat the life cycle. So here's the Sacramento Valley in its entirety. There's Sacramento and San Francisco to give you a little bit of a, sort of orientation. And I want to show you a little animation that I made for out-migrating juveniles. So the salmon when they emerge from their nests, they emerge from their eggs, they grow, and they migrate out to the ocean as they grow. So here's a little clever animation I made. So the juvenile spring-run Chinook salmon are migrating from Butte Creek. They hit the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, and at that point, they turn into smolts. Their physiology changes. They adapt to salt water and grow and enter the open ocean. And then the adult spring-run Chinook make the hundreds and hundreds of miles back to their ancestral spawning habitat in Butte Creek, which is the final 17 kilometers of Butte Creek. After hundreds and hundreds of miles, they only spawn in the very upper reaches of Butte Creek. Well, not the upper reaches, but as far as they can get in the final 17 kilometers or so. It's just an amazing journey. It's a remarkable journey. And when they return, they over summer in Butte Creek. That's why they're called spring run, because they enter the estuary in spring. And then they migrate all the way to Butte Creek at the top of the valley there. And then they over summer in these cool holding ponds, and they sexually mature and they pair off, they find their mate. And then in the autumn, in September, they dig their nests called redds. They lay their eggs, and the males spawn the eggs, fertilize the eggs, and then they die. They naturally die after they spawn. And then the cycle starts anew. So it's just an amazing journey to think about that it happens here in California. It happens here in Humboldt County. There's coho salmon, spawning down the street from my house. It's really amazing that we live in such a biologically diverse region. And before all of humanity started, Westerners, before European Americans started colonizing and systematically destroying the valley, the Sacramento Valley had magnificent marshes and tule reeds and floodplains. And in this map from 1873, you can see all the dark shaded areas here. These are all the areas where there once was floodplain and marshland. And this was an excellent habitat for out-migrating juveniles on their way to the ocean, and also for returning adults. There were many ways that the adults could get back to their ancestral spawning grounds in Butte Creek. But since then, the Sacramento River Flood Control Project from the early part of the 20th century diked and dammed and drained much of this floodplain habitat and confined the river and also the floodwaters to these channels that were routed around cities like Sacramento, so Sacramento would no longer flood, because this floodplain obviously would episodically flood major cities and cause a big mess into human culture. But these floodplains now exist as the remaining spawning habitat, or not spawning, forgive me, the remaining outmigrating and also migration corridors for the salmon, for the Butte Creek salmon, including the Sutter Bypass. So the Sutter Bypass is an artificial floodplain, but it still functions as a salmonid migration pathway. So it's amazing that salmon can exist in these narrow, channelized floodplains here that were designed to prevent the flooding of cities and also to drain fields for agriculture. All the fields you see around the Sutter Bypass are rice. It's pretty amazing. The Sacramento Valley is a pretty cool place. And here's a view of the Sutter Bypass in the wintertime when it's flooded. So typically in the summer it doesn't flood, but every winter, not every winter, not in the past couple of years because of the drought, but in previous years like 2017 and 2019, when this photo was taken, the Sutter Bypass would flood. And this was the avenue from which and for which salmon could outmigrate and also return to Butte Creek. So this is a Butte Creek pathway, an artificial one. But there have been efforts since the 1990s to improve the passage for the salmon with fish ladders and destroying or modifying dams and weirs to allow fish to get through. And you can see here's a fairly epic fish ladder at the Sutter Bypass with a husband for scale, so you can see how big it is. Here is Butte Creek. This is the spawning habitat when they finally make it up, that final 15 miles or so. They can spawn in this beautiful creek, in this canyon. But right now, Butte Creek is all over the world, and certainly all over California, is facing a warmer and much drier future. So even Butte Creek is much warmer. This summer it was up to 10 degrees warmer in spots. And so of the estimated 16,000 returning Butte Creek spring run this year, which is a significant return. In the 30 years ago, they were lucky to get 600 fish back in the stream, returning adults. But about 14,500 of them died this year, just this fall, before they could spawn due to excessively warm water. So they can help, we can build fish ladders around dams and diversions. We can try to allow fish physical passage. We can give them in-stream flows, but this is all to mitigate for the extremely warm temperatures that California is facing now. And because of these warm temperatures and because of water diversions and all the other anthropogenic activities that happen in the Central Valley, the Butte Creek spring run Chinook, which is a cherished and rare species of fish, could become extinct within 40 to 75 years. So especially if we do nothing, Chinook salmon in the Central Valley will absolutely become extinct in this century. All the researchers agree. So how do we manage for climate adaptation? We try to dedicate in-stream flows to expand habitat for fish and lower the water temperatures. More water means cooler water, essentially. We need to give salmon access to higher elevation habitat, which of course means removal of dams and other migration barriers, or trucking fish to suitable habitat above the dams. So you can capture them, you can put them in a truck, and you can drive them around the dams. And you think that's a really artificial way to save salmon, but it actually works. Trucking fish is a good strategy for saving them, to get them to that cooler, higher elevation habitat. River infrastructure that can't be removed needs to be operated so the cold water can be maintained in stream for salmon. So obviously some dams cannot be removed. We have a lot of dams that do a lot of good in our state. We can't take Shasta Dam down as much as people would like to. So we need to operate dams like Shasta so that a cold water pool is preserved for in-stream flows for salmon so they can survive. For Butte Creek specifically, this means management of the current hydropower facilities for the benefit of salmon, because there is a hydropower facility that's currently owned by PG&E on Butte Creek that has been episodically problematic for these fish. Also, like I said, dedicating more in-stream flows during critical summer months, especially during their holding and spawning months from July to September. So ecosystem protection strategies must move well beyond the current incremental efforts that we see now. There has to be a really concerted effort on the part of us as humans to try to save species from extinction. Because with reconciliation ecology, we control this system. We decide how it functions and what species we want to survive. We can make these fish survive. We can do it. If we have the political will, if we have the resources, which we do as a culture, as a wealthy nation, we can save these salmon from extinction. Here's a view of me in Butte Creek. And what I loved about standing there in the water was juvenile Butte Creek out-migrating salmon, little fish this long, little cute little parr fish, were nibbling at my toes the whole time I was filming. They were surrounding my legs, and I could feel their little suction cup kisses on my feet. It was so wonderful. So if you ever have an opportunity to have like direct experience with a endangered or threatened species, I encourage you to do so before they disappear from the planet. There are opportunities as local people to try to save species. Don't feel like the climate crisis is overwhelming, because there are things that you can do on a local level. You can take care of the animals and plants in your immediate neighborhood. And I want to make a shout out to Friends of the Butte Creek, who are now doing a GoFundMe fundraiser to buy water, basically to buy water to preserve in-stream flows for Butte Creek salmon moving forward. So I invite you to look at both my video, my observational documentary video about Butte Creek, and also about the San Joaquin River, which is another site for restoration of Spring Run. It's a short video. It's only about 6.5 minutes, and it's non-narrative. So that's why I'm giving you the narrative context now. It's mostly perceptually focused type of video. It's an art video. It's not a traditional documentary. I don't do traditional documentaries with voiceovers and piano music and stuff like that. My movies are much more sort of experimental, much more perceptual, a little bit more focused, and a little bit more like research driven than most documentaries. Okay, well, that's my little presentation there. Okay, good.
Thank you, Cindy. That was incredible.
Oh, cool. Awesome. So next we have, Lindsay, you're next.
Thanks, Cindy. Okay, I'm gonna screen share. All right. So thank you, Cindy, for that. And thank you, Adam and Cindy, for putting together this great show and the Zoom talks so that we can all be here today. I appreciate all your work, and the show looks fantastic. So the few pieces that I put in the faculty show are really the culmination of a bunch of separate projects that I began in January of 2018. And all of my work, if I can sum it all up, all of my artwork for years and years has really been about relationships between mind and place. Like, that's what I'm into. And I spent the decade before I moved up to Humboldt County making work about perceptual experiences and cognitive experiences in the desert landscape down in Southern California and in Utah. And at the end of 2017, so I was living down in Los Angeles, and I had been for a long time, and this dream apartment that I had, this rent-controlled 2-bedroom in the hip neighborhood for under $1,000 a month, flooded. And that led me to decide whether or not I actually wanted to stay where I was. And I put all of my stuff into storage and began this journey traveling around the country, back and forth, crisscrossing the country, that ultimately led me to move up here to Humboldt County and to teach at CR. So it really makes sense to me that this work, the finish of it is happening for the show here at the gallery at the faculty exhibition. So when I put all my stuff in storage and decided to just drive around, I sort of thought it would be for a couple of months, and it ended up being a year and a half. And I make, in general, medium-size oil paintings on stretch canvas, and I also do video, but I had to figure out a way that I could still make work in this nomadic, I mean, I was basically like driving around the country in an SUV, and I had to find a way to continue to make work at this time. And that's how I got to these works on paper. So as I mentioned, all my work is really about these connections between mind and place. And these first couple of paintings have to do specifically with two places being connected through my experience. So they're not near each other necessarily, or like physically connected, but they're connected somehow through me, and that sort of like tunneling led to these works. So this one is called Horseshoe Canyon in 940 South Cornell. And Horseshoe Canyon is a place in Utah that has these life-size rock paintings in them. And I had gone there some years ago and had a very profound experience that led me to think about, why make these paintings here? There's no direct descendants of the culture that made the paintings, and I'm fascinated by them and had a really moving spiritual experience with these rock paintings. And I just could not get my mind out of thinking about like, why this spot in the canyon, you know? And I started thinking about specific locations in my history that I would want to make work with. And out of this very profound experience in Horseshoe Canyon, Utah, I decided to make some video work around significant locations in my hometown in Villa Park, Illinois. So the other address and the title of this piece is the address of the house I grew up in. And this painting is really about this connection that started to form through my experience between my revisiting the house I grew up in and this canyon in Utah, and that are now connected for me through the artwork and through my experience. And this one is called 22nd Street or Butterfield Road. And those are just two roads where I'm from outside Chicago that connect at one point, or they crisscross, I'm not sure. But I have some, all kinds of memories of driving around this street, and I can never remember which one it's on, if it's on any specific location is on the one street or the other. And that sort of confusion of memory and location, where you can remember an event, but the specifics sort of disintegrate, and how that relates to these specific locations led me to make this abstract painting. Not that the visual references in the painting look anything like this place, but I wanted to play around with this idea, mostly through the title, but just about remembering things and the slippage that occurs in memory of places and of events, and how that falls away. And so obviously I'm driving, as I'm making this work, I'm just driving back and forth literally all over the country. So like California to Florida to Washington State and back, and basically having this crisscrossing experience in the landscape, and at the same time having that a similar internal experience of crisscrossing my own memory, and like following threads between places and what places mean to me, and what it means to revisit places. And this painting evolved out of that, and trying to capture that feeling, like a nostalgic feeling, and tracing back and forth over locations. And I take a lot of snapshots that I use later. I just put them up all over my studio and use as references in my paintings. And I have like hundreds of them that I had taken during this traveling time. And out of these hundreds, there were these couple of photographs of landscapes that they're color photographs, but they look black and white just because of the specifics of the landscape. So some of these, there's a few snapshots in this collage, and some of them are in Iceland and the ancient bristlecone pine forest. One's in a cave full of bats in Idaho. but there are these photographs that read as black and white because the landscape seems black and white. And I just slapped them down on this paper and wanted to make a painting around them or with them. And it's been in my studio after I moved up here and got settled and stopped being totally nomadic. I had this work up in my studio this whole time that I've lived here. And in the pandemic, like a lot of us, I'm assuming, I've gotten quite antsy, and it's like dragging on, and I want something to change, and I want something to be different. And I feel like I want newness. And I had been very recently been thinking about that a lot. And one thing that came to my mind is one sure way to generate something new is to finish something else. Like that necessitates a new situation, a new condition if you finish things. And so all of these 3 images that I've shown you were halfway done, basically since I started this, traveling time years ago. And so I decided that for this faculty show, that was going to be my project, to resolve these open-ended paintings. And I have this up in my studio with these few snapshots just glued on this paper. And for whatever reason, I decided to paint like a portal, like a threshold. I felt like that's what this needed to be. And all this work is super intuitive and super abstract. And it's been very process oriented for me, but in the end, getting ready for this faculty show, it really became about like tying up those loose ends, like finishing work in order to make space for something new. And so the 4th piece that I have is what ended up being this book. And this is the one that is particularly significant to me and that I really wanted to talk about. When I gave my leave of absence at my jobs that I'd been at for a decade in LA, I wanted to I thought about, if I get a big piece of paper, I can make a big artwork while I'm traveling and just fold it up and unfold it and work on it and then fold it back up. And I did that. I started with this piece as this giant piece of gessoed paper. And then over the years of folding it and unfolding it, I realized it operated like a book. And so I ended up cutting it and sewing it together to actually just be a book. And this piece of paper that now is this book traveled with me this entire time. And I would just glue random stuff into it. And a lot of it was actually writing. So in my artistic practice, I write all the time. I write about my work, I write about whatever, and the language informs my artwork. So this is the last page of the book, and this is the list of all the places that I went to in this trip before I ended up coming to Humboldt, which is right here near the end. And so this piece of paper was kind of this companion for me, and I would write all the time. I would write down dreams that I was having and stuff that I was seeing and places I was going throughout my time driving around, and also just glue things on there. And it was a little bit of a meditative practice, and I wasn't thinking at all in the beginning of what it was going to look like. I just would slap stuff down there. And when I decided to finish this for the show, then it became more conscious. Like I had just this jumble of images and words and stuff. And because it was an open piece of paper that I then folded, different pages were upside down, and the back, what had been the back of the paper, was now a page in a book. And so I made it my project to turn this lump of paper that I had sewn together with all this random stuff to make it coherent. And it became like a puzzle, essentially, for me. Like I would open to this pages of all this random stuff and figure out what was significant. So in working with the language here, I would go through all this writing that I had done and pick out words that were significant and essentially redact everything else, either with color or imagery, gluing stuff on top of it, and try to extricate or distill some meaning from this jumble by connections that I was making in the language and in the images and colors that came together in a kind of happenstance sort of way. And it became essentially a formal project, like they're really getting it to a state where I wanted to show it and to have it be complete. It was driven mostly by formal concerns. So I opened up to these different pages, and like here you have all of my various coffee stains and things like that I decided to trace. And because my work is so related to landscape, and that made sense to me. That is sort of how landscape works. Like things just are placed on top of each other to form the landscape. And I feel like that's how I was engaging with the paper and with the material that was here. And so once I was doing this in my studio to really bring it all together, I started going through my archives of collage materials and photographs that I have worked with in my studio. Like I said, I take these snapshots and then I use them. They inform my paintings. My paintings are abstract, not realistic, but they inform them. So I had all these printouts, all the way going back to like doing my MFA. And I made all of that material just fair game, and then just took it page by page, looking at each new like half constructed image as its own work that I was going to resolve and make coherent and make with whatever was there, make it make sense, incorporating other materials and unifying through formal elements of art. And, I had all these art history printouts. This is from like a Juan Sanchez Cotan painting that I like, and just random bits. And somehow this act of like finding ways to fit everything together, and what was worth keeping, what was significant in the language and in the imagery, and what could be covered up and layered, became quite an important process for me personally. And I hope, my intention is to make individual works on each of these pages that are engaging and visually interesting beyond whatever the content was for me when I was making it. That's my intention with the work. And I like how, and I would like to do more with the way that the handwritten text turns into just marks and into lines, and it sits at that level where it can be about what the words are communicating, and also what the actual lines look like visually. And some I like more than others. That I put this in here because this is the page that I don't love so much. The way these two parts came together, I would not have done intentionally. Like the juxtaposition was not super interesting to me, but that became a challenge for me to figure out how to make it work and how to make it all come together. So this is everything in the show. So I'm really pleased that these projects that began with this sort of like open up to the universe, just I'm going to let everything go and see where things take me. That journey, which ultimately led me to teach here at CR, that the work has that it's being shown here now at the CR gallery. I feel like that's a nice like tying a bow on it, and I am excited for what will come next in my studio now that this has opened up some room. So thank you all for listening, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's wonderful work, and I really also enjoy your inclusion of text and image too, because I struggle with the same thing. I'm always figuring out ways I can puzzle the two together. So I can certainly appreciate that interest you have. So next we have Mina. Are you here, Mina? Did you get off the plane in Chicago? I think Mina's here. Yay! Okay, I have your two images that you included queued up. So let me share my screen, and you can tell me when to advance the slide.
All right, I'll do that.
Okay, let me see here.
So I have I've worked in caustic, excuse me, for many years, and these paintings have. Well, let me start. Before the pandemic, I was interested in starting a new series based on the 161 colors, maximum number of colors of Crayola crayons that you can have. So I heard an interesting story, I think on NPR, about how every few years the Crayola company takes some colors away and adds new colors. And it was very interesting how they ask people, they do all these focus groups and ask people what colors to add or take away. And I thought that was really fascinating. So I got the box, and I was about to start working with them in kind of a, it's not really encaustic traditionally, but it is, melting them like you would with encaustic, and it creates really incredible, vivid colors. So that's what I was planning to do. And then the pandemic, of course, came on, and I spent some time going through old work, as many of you have said, sort of looking back past and kind of cleaning up my studio and finding works that really didn't work for me anymore, and making a huge pile of them and repurposing with a plan to repurpose them. And then my kids and grandkids who live in Chicago came for the summer, at the height of the pandemic. They're both teachers, the parents are, and they come to us in the summer, and they decided not to return. They decided to take a leave of absence and stay with us for 10 months with these two little girls who, of course, came into the studio. And what do little girls do with crayons? I mean, they were in heaven. So I was kind of stealing crayons from them periodically when they were napping to incorporate into some of these paintings. And so what I did is I took two old, the works that are in this show. This is part of it was a very large canvas that has a boa constrictor skin collaged onto it. When my husband was in medical school, one of his fellow students had a boa constrictor, and boa constrictors shed their skin completely, like in one piece. And people like to pass those things on to me. I'm not sure why, but he gave me a number of them. And so the original painting was about 8 feet long. And I cut it up into 4 pieces and attached the canvas to boards so that they would be nice and secure, and repainted them. But the skin, you can actually, this is the part of the skin right here. And it's amazing because they were originally done in the late 70s, and they're still pretty much intact. I mean, they're a little bit fragile, but the pieces really maintained their integrity. And so this is one of four of those paintings. And so, in some ways, metaphor of the snake, and dealing with the political situation that we have been in for a number of years, and then the idea of shedding the skin and getting rid of that. And even though it really hasn't gone away, we can always hope that it will. So those were ideas percolating for me when I was working on them. And Cindy, you can advance to the next one. So this is another one. This painting, I didn't alter the shape of it at all. It was the initial painting is still there, but I did add to it with the crayons, and the color really popped significantly from that. It's got a lot of collaged materials, string and little metal discs collaged on there. Those were already were already there, and actually some little shards of glass in this section. And actually, I'm looking at it. I think we've got it upside down, but
Oh, sorry.
all right. It's probably the way I sent it to you. The title of this one has to do. It does have. It has some hologram of leopards, leopard skin hologram that was on the much more easily seen. If you look at it in the gallery, you can see it. Probably, if you look carefully, you can see it pretty clearly. That was under there, and the idea of the leopard changing its spots. That's really how that title came about. But texture and color are the things that intrigue me the most, and that I'm most involved in my own work. And so the kids and grandkids are back in Chicago, and we're here now visiting them. And when they were here last winter, I live in Mendocino. I am still teaching at CR online, but I did teach face-to-face when CR was on the Mendocino coast. We have about 450 varieties of mushrooms that grow here. And I swear I have all 450 on my property. And my granddaughter and I last winter did mushroom spore prints on handmade paper. And it was really fun. And she's back here. And I actually brought one of her prints for her. And so I decided in her honor that I would make them again this year. And I've been really having a lot of fun with that. And experimenting with different types of mushrooms that make, that drop their spores. And that's some really amazing patterns that they make.
Do you have some of the prints there with you in Chicago? I can stop sharing and you can show us.
No, I don't. They're in process. I haven't finished them. I've just been going out every day collecting mushrooms and adding them, putting them down on the paper. But if you ever want to do it, it's so much fun. And it's really a mystery what you're going to get from them. They have to be mushrooms with gills, of course, to drop them. And if they're really wet, don't put them on handmade paper because this will just destroy paper. But yeah, it's really fun. So that's really all I have to say. I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, I certainly love the textural surfaces, that you're interested in textural description is so spot on because your work is just so wonderful to just, like mushroom hunting, diving into the details of the surfaces and the quality of the color. And they're just beautiful works. And they're really nice in the flesh, you guys, better than the reproduction. They're just amazing because I got to be with them in the gallery just yesterday. So I would really encourage you to come and look at these pretty remarkable paintings.
Thank you.
So we have the Q&A section open now. Would anybody like to, you can either contribute questions you may have directly, you can just unmute yourself and speak up, or you can also contribute in the chat if you prefer to ask questions that way. So we'll open it up to everyone.
Where can you see your video for the salmon? Where can you just like rewatch it or play it? Is it only in the gallery?
It's only, Clara, it's only in the gallery right now, but maybe I can sneak you a special link.
Okay.
It's going to be published hopefully pretty soon, and it'll be available to everybody pretty soon. But yeah, right now it's just in the gallery, but maybe, talk to me.
Okay, great. In the meantime, I'll watch your other videos on your website. I was like snooping on there being like, is it there yet? So that's really cool.
No, it's not there yet.
I love the activism of it. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. And it's right, it's right by Chico. It's in the Sacramento Valley.
Yeah.
Where you know where Mule Creek is. Yeah.
Yeah, I walked by it today. So
I know, I was so glad when you signed up. I'm like, oh, this is right up, right in Clara's territory.
Yeah.
Home turf.
And, it means a lot to me to see like how art can help with the activism of it, because when I heard about it originally, that was just so depressing. So it's amazing to see that there's things that we can still do about it.
Mhm. Yeah, Friends of Butte Creek folks, shout out to that organization. They've been fighting for more than 20 years for the Butte Creek salmon. So,
Amazing.
okay.
And just, I wanted to say to Mrs. Cohen that your work is amazing. And that was just really beautiful to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
There's another question for Mina from Rhonda Orr in the chat. Mina, I'm very curious at how you utilize mushrooms in your art. Do you let them dry first or use them while moist and fresh? How do you add them to your mixed media? Or was I mistaken?
I was just typing that. So you just put them down fresh. They have to be, pretty. They can't be like if they're slimy or anything, they're already past the time. But if they're fresh mushrooms and they just came up, then you just lay them down with the gills face down on the paper. The hardest thing for me is not peeking too soon. You should let them sit there for a day or two, and then they drop their spores.
Cool, thank you. Does anyone else have a question for any of the artists or the show or anything?
I have a question for Shannon. Since I know you as a ceramicist, however you say that, were you interested in watercolor previously, or was just something new on the spur of the moment you decided? Or
I started painting watercolors with my daughter.
okay.
I mean, that's when I started, because it's a really, I mean, you probably know, it's a wonderfully accessible media that it requires little cleanup. And kind of fell in love with them through painting with her, and then started painting just with my friends in Southern California for a few days, and then just took off during the residency.
Did you do ceramics at the residency also, or just the?
I did. I had 3 projects going there. I had one curriculum project where I was developing my online art appreciation class. I had the watercolor paintings, and then I was doing the paper folding and paper clay layering on the folded forms. So it was a really interesting, I was in a tiny little cottage. It really wasn't much of an art studio. It was like a little live work, I was like triangulating all these projects using the front porch. It was cool. It's a space, it's a residency that houses a lot of writers, a lot of musicians. There's facilities for that on campus. So it's yeah, it's not discipline specific, which is really nice. It's not that we had a lot of social interaction, but when we did, it was cool. We met one night, like for coffee on the patio, and it was awesome. I feel like a lot of the other residencies I've been to have been ceramic specific, so this one was cool to be able to take in other people's poetry and musical works. Very cool.
Cool, thank you, Shannon. There's another question from John Brunskill. To everyone, do road trips foster creativity for you?
Yes. Seems like that was a theme in all of our conversations tonight. And maybe that's one of the great things about rural life, wanting to sort of like explore, like get to cities, right? You've got to like explore the journey between here and there. There's a lot to see between here and there. So I love road trips more than ever in my life now.
I'm completely dependent on road trips for my art. I can't do it unless I'm in a watershed somewhere. I got to get there. Anyway, Lindsay, you were going to contribute.
Yeah, for me too, there's something about the actual time in the confined space in the car. There's the travel aspect, but actually the getting there and having that amount of time to not do anything else is like really important for me to get to sort of let my mind like figure stuff out when I can't be distracted by regular daily life stuff. So the actual driving is significant for me too.
I also love it as a way to take in media. My favorite forms of media are audiobooks and podcasts, and I use the Autumn app to listen to long form journalism. And oh, good road trip is great for that.
And a follow-up question from John Brunskill. How do you balance journey with destination? Shannon was just describing that.
Yeah.
Journey. Oh, well, it's, I'm always trying to hope that I can be interested in things that aren't too far away from my house. Butte Creek's about 4 hours drive from here. So, but the San Joaquin River, I have to do that because that's about an 8-hour drive. That's a more serious commitment. So I have to do the San Joaquin during winter break or spring break or summer. So, yeah, the journey. I always feel like when I'm first doing the R&D for a project, I really worry, like, is it, all the gas I'm going to spend, all the carbon I'm going to spew into the air, all the time I'm going to commit, am I going to find anything worthy of art where I'm going, and I'm driving, nervous. And I always do. I always find really compelling things to film, but yeah, for me, the journey is kind of filled with anxiety because I know also that people die on the road. It's not a safe place to be. But once I'm there and out of the car, then I'm great. Once I got my camera, I got my microphone, I'm out in the wilderness and everything's wonderful. But yeah, the
I'm
journey.
thinking about your,
Oh,
go ahead.
I was just thinking the journey is always fraught with how much carbon am I expending? How much am I contributing to climate change? I can't help but to think that a lot. Anyway, go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, I agree completely, and balancing all of that, with a quest for adventure and a need to be around, major museums and things like that is always, you try to pile as many things into the trip as possible. See friends, go to museums, pile it all in at one time. But for me, the journey, I feel like as someone who's trained in clay, if you don't appreciate the process, and I'm not talking about driving anymore, I'm just talking about the journey in general, process is such a big part of why I do what I do. So the journey is really important to me. And like Cindy said, it's not always great. It's not always a surefire thing. Never does it really feel like a slam dunk. We can always succumb to the, woes of our different media or whatever, things not working out quite as planned, but the journey is really valuable. Yep. You gotta work that process so that you can, I think, make a lot and be prolific. That helps.
Yeah, you just have to have novel experiences,
Yeah.
to activate your mind and your creative imagination and your intellect. For sure, all artists have to do that. Have to go there. Risk being out on the road for 8 or 10 or 15 hours to get the imagery you need to get the experiences you need to get to have a creative life.
Yeah. Oh, Lindsay, your book today, I had a chance to really, today was my first day in the gallery, not just worrying about my little paintings. I was able to really take in everyone else's work, and that was really fantastic. And I'm just so into your book. At first I didn't know if I should touch it because I didn't have any white gloves. But I went through it and I looked at every page, and to me, it's just the tactile quality of each page. I felt like when I turned the page, it made a noise, it was a full sensory experience. And I just felt like there's such richness to that as an object. I really loved it with those paintings.
Thanks, Shannon. And
Thanks for
yeah, it
finishing
was
that.
really important to me that it just be there in the gallery on a pedestal so people can touch it, and whatever happens to it. I think I even put on when I was writing about the show, whatever happens, that's part of it, just like all the coffee stains when I was traveling around and writing and drawing on it. Whatever happens in the gallery is part of the thing, the actual object for me. But thank you for looking at it. That actually makes me super happy that you went through it.
I loved it.
Cool. Well, we're about at time, so maybe we'll wrap it up. But this has been a super awesome experience, and it's just been wonderful to listen to my colleagues talk about their work. And the show is really great. It's going to be up through January 21st, as I recall, 2022. And Adam, the gallery hours are going to be, just to give you a shout out here, why don't you tell us about the gallery hours and give us a little insight about the show?
So right now, the good news is we have 2 new gallery attendants. So we will actually have gallery hours on Tuesdays from 10 to 4 and Wednesdays from 10 to 4. And then I'll usually be in the gallery between 1 and 4 Mondays and Thursdays. But if you would like to get into the gallery between different hours or on a Friday, you can always call the art office. And if I'm on campus that day, I can coordinate with you. And then on Fridays, Laura in the office will be able to help by opening the gallery up for you. And then as far as some commentary on the process of putting the show together, it was really fun. This is the first time I've been on campus as a gallerist here. This is my second time as an interim gallerist while Ruth was on maternity leave. This is the first time I've got to interact with faculty artwork. So it was really nice to get to, learn a little bit more about my coworkers essentially through their artwork and the reason that they're on campus teaching here at CR. So thank you and I appreciate it. And then it's also really cool. I get to have some of my own work on display. It's I'm in the back of the gallery right now. So I have a video I made projecting. It's actually in reverse because I'm behind the screen, but kind of a neat experience for me to get to be able to share this because normally I work in still photography. And in 2020 and 2021, I had a couple musicians approach me and ask me to help make videos for music that they had made. So the project projecting back here was inspired a little bit by an early surrealist video called Meshes of the Afternoon. And then a lot of it is just really need to hear the music to go along with it. It's a kind of ambient song that has very kind of moments that are unsettling in the soundtrack. So I tried to make it so that the video would kind of have some of that included with it. And video is cool because you can do things that you can't do in still. And like this shot right here, I made it so that it changes width along one axis, but not height along another. And you can do neat little things like that with video to really change how the viewer feels while they're watching it. So I would encourage you to pay attention to that in other videos and just wonder what kind of little tricks the editors are doing to change how you're feeling or perceiving the movie.
It's a cool installation. I really appreciate the time and effort you put into it, Adam. And for sure, go see that installation in the gallery. It's trippy. It's immersive. It's cool. Okay, well, I guess we'll sign off. Thanks so much for joining us, folks, and it's been great. And do try to see the work in the flesh. It's really beautiful stuff. It's just amazing to see it with all of its tactile qualities and all of its subtle colorations. And work in real life is a pretty amazing experience. So we hope you come and see the exhibit. It'll be up mostly through the end of January 21, I think. So
actually, I have one more thing. It will be up through the end of January, but the gallery closes to the public on December 9th. So really there's only about a week and a half if you wanted to get in here in person, because it won't be open during the Thanksgiving break. And then it'll be open from the 1st until the 9th. After that, if you'd like to come in, say you're unable to get in before it closes, you can always contact us and we can arrange for a viewing. So,
that's awesome. Thank you.
welcome.
Thanks so much. Okay, everybody, have a good evening. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having this on Zoom.
Thanks, Cindy.
That was fun.
This is so fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was totally great. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.